Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jessica Abel. I'm the Director of Development here at the Arden.
And I'm Jonathan Silver. I'm the Associate Artistic Director here at the Arden. And welcome to this special Engage with the Art event focusing on the themes and topics of our current production, What the Constitution Means to Me by Heidi Schreck. We are so excited to have you here for this panel discussion with these brilliant minds sitting behind us right now.
Before we begin, we want to acknowledge a few folks who've helped make today possible. First and foremost, we'd like to thank honorary producers Marilyn and David Kraut. There they are. There they are. Thank you so much for your continued support and passion to help make this happen. And we also want to acknowledge the ACLU of Pennsylvania and our media partners, WHYY, for their support and help putting this panel together.
Finally, we'd also like to thank the What the Constitution Means to Me Productions honorary producers, Nancy and Bob Elfont, as well. So we don't want to waste any time. Please take this opportunity to turn off your cell phones and electronic devices. Our discussion today is approximately 60 to 70 minutes. Should you need to leave at any time, please exit carefully through these aisles right here or by using the stairs in the back of the center section.
Without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn this over to our panelists and hand the discussion off to Jamila Bey from WHYY.
Thank you, one and all. Good afternoon. Welcome. Most of you have already been here, but welcome in again. I'm Jamila Bey, and I'm very glad to be here, and I will not be using the competitive speaking teenage voice, although that was hit me right in the feels. It reminded me of when I was 15. I am currently the editorial director at WHYY News. Please, give it up, get up. My boss is here, give it up, yes. Our much beloved public radio station, which at the heart of it is the First Amendment principle. First Amendment, anybody? I'm a fan. Our freedoms enshrined are important, and this play is a great jumping off point for that. So without further ado, I realize, as a very famous movie once reminded us, Otis, nobody came to see you. I'm Otis. I'm here to moderate with these brilliant legal minds, these brilliant political minds, about this living, important document that some people think is a patchwork quilt to keep us warm. No further delay. Let's all introduce each other, and I'll start by tag. Dr. Gloria Browne-Marshall, who is to my left immediately, but there's more to her than just that.
Good evening. My name is Gloria Browne-Marshall. I'm a professor of constitutional law and Africana studies at John Jay College, City University of New York. I'm also a playwright, so I love being in the theater and on the stage. And I am the writer and host of the Emmy-winning series, Your Democracy, produced by WHYY. And the last thing is I'm an author of several books involving the Constitution on rights, and the most recent one is She Took Justice, the Black Woman, Law, and Power. And I give it over.
Yes.
I'm Allyson Schwartz, and
Congresswoman.
Some of you may have voted for me. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. 25 years in elected office. And I think, I was a state senator, elected in 1990. I was just the third woman elected to the state senate in Pennsylvania, elected to Congress, served as the only woman from Pennsylvania in Congress for most of my 10 years in Congress. Kind of a disgrace for Pennsylvania. We fixed that more recently, which is great. What I'm known for particularly is my work on healthcare and healthcare for women, healthcare for children, actually healthcare for everyone in this country. So I've done a few other things too. Being in Congress was great. I love doing it. It's important to me. And I hope tonight we get to talk also a little bit maybe even about the fact that earlier on in my career, I was one of the founders of a women's health center here in Philadelphia right after Roe v. Wade. It was a pretty courageous thing to do, but we did it, and it worked, and it was a really important thing to do. And certainly women's rights, healthcare rights have been really very much a part of my my whole career. So I'm delighted to be here and excited to have this conversation and learn something more even about the Constitution, which certainly that play did help as well. So my disclaimer will be, I made laws, I didn't challenge them, I guess, and I challenged previous ones, but understanding the constitutional rights we have and the sense of liberty and justice is something that should pervade us all, should really be, engage us all and make sure we care about it. So look forward to the conversation.
Well, good evening. My name is Anjelica Hendricks, and I'm president of the Greater Philadelphia affiliate of the ACLU, and I see some board members and supporters here. Thank you so much. Even though that takes up a lot of time, in my day job, I am a faculty member of Penn Cary Law, where my focus is on criminal law, criminal justice, race in the law, and I come to the space from prior experience as a public defender, combating mass incarceration, and upholding civil rights and civil liberties. Thank you.
So thank you all for coming. I'm Kathryn Kolbert. I spent about 25 years litigating around abortion rights, perhaps best known in the world for having argued a case called Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which was the 1992 case that reaffirmed Roe, and was a co-founder of the Center for Reproductive Rights. I just recently published a book called Controlling Women, What We Must Do Now to Save Reproductive Freedom, and spending a lot of time talking about the Dobbs decision and all of the craziness at the Supreme Court. So I'm sure we will get into it, and I appreciate that.
Now, before I let you go, Kitty, you are public radio broadcast legend yourself. Can you remind everyone a little bit about what you're talking?
I was the creator and producer of Justice Talking, which was a show on public radio for 10 years, about 125 stations around the country, and really was trying to give a look at many of the issues that affect all of us and how they affect the Constitution.
Yes, thank you. So I told you the panel was stellar. You knew that, though. Thank you, each and every one of you, and without further ado, let's hop into it. So this play, What the Constitution Means to Me, talked about a great many subjects, and we could jump in at any point, but before we do, I want to give everyone the opportunity to bring up a constitutional issue that you want to make sure we address today. We have but an hour, and since we are here, we're going to do that, whether it's in the play or not. What issue at this time in history do you think we American citizens need to be thinking about?
Well, I'll mention one that is not as specific as women's rights and reproductive rights. We're going to talk about that. But it's just the right to democracy, and that really pervades everything else we're going to do or not be able to do in this country. So the right to vote, access to the polls, all beating up on people who work in the polls and really just challenging the ability to vote and to take that vote seriously, and a transfer of power. Got to travel as a member of Congress to different countries that were emerging democracies, and we talked about how we could move from one president to another. Even if you really didn't like that president, you understood that you had to wait till the next election before you could do something about that. And then we damn well tried to do it, but still, and people said we were going to flee the country. And around the world, they just admired that and had a really hard time to do that, to actually accept the outcome of elections. So I would say that's one that we have to, it sort of encompasses all the other things we want to do.
And if I can also try to speak on that as well, voting, but also voting on local and state issues. And I think, as we've noticed just now, just having an election day, the power of even changing our state constitutions. The right to abortion is now in several state constitutions, and that's because we're looking at the U.S. Constitution as the ground, and we have the power to build above that, using our power to vote at the state and local level as well.
So the issue that I care about the most is reproductive freedom for all people. And clearly that is an issue that's in the news. Congratulations on Tuesday. It was a terrific day across the country. But I think that issue, because of the Dobbs decision just last year, the Supreme Court has shown us that the notion of stare decisis, which to lawyers means reliance on precedent, that you get to reaffirm what previous courts have done, even if you disagree with it, precedent requires you to reaffirm it. This court has told us with the Dobbs decision that that is no longer true. They believe that as long as there are 5 votes to overrule previous law, they have the power to do so and will not be hesitant to do so. And so, to me, not only is abortion at issue and the ability to make decisions about your entire reproductive life, but all of the issues that derive from the 14th Amendment's Liberty Clause, issues around ability to control one's children, issues around lesbian and gay rights and trans rights, issues involving decisions late in life, all of which derive from the 14th Amendment's Liberty Clause, are at risk because this court has 5 votes that is not afraid to throw out existing precedent. And to me, that is a tragedy. It is just perhaps the most debilitating and heartrending decision because so many people's lives and health are at stake as a result of the court's willingness to throw everything out the window. And I think we need to think, and we'll talk about this a lot more, but to me, we have to ignore the lawyers, okay? I'm a little litigator. I spent my whole life litigating. The reality is, however, that the only way we are going to win back these rights are to get political, and to get political from the school boards, like Central Bucks County School Board, all the way to the Supreme Courts of states, to the Supreme Court of the United States, because they are appointed by the president, so and reaffirmed by the Congress. So I really think we need to think outside the litigation box and become active in our democracy.
I would agree with all of those and add the criminal justice system. During this time period in which this country is 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's incarcerated population, we need to understand we incarcerate more juveniles and more women than any other country that gives documentation and record and data on it. We need to understand that the criminal justice system and the way it is abused from the 13th Amendment in 1865 when slavery was abolished and indentured servitude except as punishment for a crime, triggering the convict lease system that lasted until World War II. And now we have people who are incarcerated doing the jobs that corporate employees are doing for pennies, and then once they are finally released, are not able to find work because those same corporations don't hire them. Right now, the criminal justice system is the slavery issue of our day. We need to understand, yes, how important it is. It is breaking up families, destroying communities, and those people who are incarcerated are being used, like the 3/5 rule within the Constitution, to count the number of people who are in that population to determine the number of those going to Congress. Because of those prisons located in these different areas in rural communities, those communities get more state, local, and federal funding based on the population. But is it that you think any politician is going to those prisons asking them what they need? They're not being represented, they're being used in so many places. So I would say all of those things are important. The criminal justice system is affecting generations to come. And as we get closer to the year 2045, when this country becomes majority people of color, yes, the U.S. Census has been saying this for a while, and that's why these issues we're talking about, with abortion rights being struck down, with the undermining of voting rights, all of this is because people are afraid of the year 2045. So when we begin to think about laying the foundation of all these other constitutional rights, when other people are running in such fear, we have to understand where those fears are coming from and realize the criminal justice system is the last major system in this country that has no national reform. We had the Voting Rights Act of 1965, We had the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Housing Act of 1968. There's been no national criminal justice reform. So we're still dealing with laws that were in place from the time period of slavery and Jim Crow. So I would say the criminal justice system.
I'm going to take some moderator privilege and say everybody's agreeing we're going to start with the 14th Amendment to talk about. Equal protection flows from this amendment. The right of citizenship flows from this amendment. Recognizing that this particular play and the conversation we're having today focuses on the protection of the Constitution for people who call themselves women, identify as women, or whatever the nomenclature has to do with. Is this a particularly dangerous time? If so, why? And how can the Constitution be used to make it less dangerous, make it more fair and equitable for women and those who call themselves women?
Well, I'm happy to jump in here on this one. The answer is the 14th Amendment and the way that the Supreme Court has interpreted it in Dobbs is extraordinarily dangerous. Because basically they have said, even though there had been a right in the Constitution and recognized for almost 50 years, the court has said, if a right is not part of our nation's history and tradition, and if there has been a history of discrimination against that right, they will not recognize it. And so most of the modern rights that we know of in the 14th Amendment fail that test. It's amazing to me that the court has constructed it in such a way that it's almost impossible to create or recognize reproductive and sexual rights, and a whole lot of like the right to travel, for example. It's an unenumerated right. It's not specifically mentioned in the Constitution. The way this court has interpreted how you are able to establish a constitutional right means that they may not recognize the right to travel. Unless it's about religious liberty and freedom, I think this court is pretty much willing to forsake anything that they thought weren't part of the Constitution when it was adopted or amended in particular time frames. And that's pretty scary.
As a non-legal scholar on the panel, I can say it's astounding to me the idea that we are going to undo all the incredible work and progress we have made around women's rights. Actually, gay rights. I mean, you can name any of these. The idea that the work we've done on domestic violence, the work we've done on workplace discrimination, the work, of course, on health care and access to health care. The only good thing that's come of Dobbs is the fact that we actually say abortion out loud. And that is really astounding to me. We sort of used to whisper it 50 years ago. So I think that is maybe useful, that it isn't something to be so afraid of. But I think what it means to me as a citizen is that we can't count on the Supreme Court to defend any of our liberties or to make any progress in a progressive way or to recognize what we've learned in the last 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 years. I mean, what I know certainly in listening to what's going on in Congress right now is that the terms liberty and freedom means something very different to politicians, different politicians. And it's not just, it's deep. When you hear the new Speaker of the House talk about what he believes in when he does, or read anything that he has said, it's very different than the way I would interpret it. And so that's, to me, pretty scary. It means we need to be strong against that. We need to kick this off, it's in a really articulate way. We need to care about politics. And so many people say politics is, I'm not interested, it's not about me, I don't know who to vote for, I don't even know when the election is, why does it matter? Oh my goodness, it matters to each and every one of us. And it's easy to take for granted rights that we have won. But to see them taken away, I think is kind of a remarkable moment. In fact, we talk about it as legislators. As we get this done, it's going to be hard to take it away. If you give something somebody, it's hard to take it back. Sometimes we do, but it's a hard thing to do. And the fact that we're experiencing a moment that is a real challenge in this country to who we are and who we want to be and what kind of society we want to live in. So it's scary when the Supreme Court is not backing us up with that in any way. And precedent is, how can they take away a right that women think they have to family planning, to controlling our lives and bodies in any way, let alone fighting for equal pay? I mean, you can go on to the list. I'm sure it affects divorce and challenges the theory of what family has to be and what it has to look like, where you have to come from and who you are is really pretty scary. So it doesn't make immigration easier. It doesn't make health care. We talk about the right to health care. I mean, it wasn't written down, so I guess we don't have one. It's really just not learning from our experience about who we are as well as who we can be. And they're not taking that seriously, and that's pretty upsetting in a very basic way. And we have to fight back. I don't want to leave it on a negative note. I was elected office. I actually thought you could get things done. I did. I think you can change things. I think we will, because we have to. And we'll get to work. And I'm emboldened every time by seeing what's happening in these elections, particularly around abortion rights. And Jamila Bey would ask me the question about, is abortion just a political thing? Well, it is a political thing. It is, but it is one that we can talk about now in a way that we have to, even more seriously than we ever had, to hang on to it. There are many, a good number of politicians who used to just be pro-life because they thought that's what they had to be to get elected in Pennsylvania, for sure, and maybe in other places. But they didn't really had ever thought one way or another about the effect that would have on their lives or their daughters' lives or their wives' lives or anyone in their community. I think that's getting a little harder, and I think that's a good thing. It'll be harder for them to just say, I am who I am, and that's just what it is. But anyway, we have work to do to what we used to say back in the day. If we can't change their minds, we have to change their faces. So that was harsh, but that's what we have to do.
I'd like to just connect some history because I write books on legal history, and I am going to just say, if you follow what happened after the Civil War with the U.S. Constitution, the interpretation by the Supreme Court with African Americans, you can follow what's happening with women. And you'll see it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And I think it's very important looking at history. People put the African-American history in some type of bubble, like it's unique from all other history. And there are facts, there are things that are unique. But it's also could be used as a learning tool for so many other groups to see how the Supreme Court, the federal law was written, the Supreme Court undermined the federal laws going into Reconstruction in the 1800s. And the idea of nativism, and when it's, we want more white babies, so therefore we're going to force women to not work. We're going to force women. There used to be limits on the number of hours a woman could work. A white woman, they didn't care how many hours Native American and black women worked. And so when you start to look at the history, of what's happened under law with African Americans, you can begin to see the pattern in practice of how laws are put in place, and then the U.S. Supreme Court is used for their own personal interest to undermine those laws. And then it takes litigation, legislation, and protests together with a vision, because without vision, the people perish. With a vision as to how we're going to work together in the future. If you just put it as women's rights and you don't add the other rights there and the other people together to come together and with communal interests, then you're losing out on the ability to make sustained progress. It can't just be women's rights. They're important. As a female, as an African American, as someone who's had family line that dates back in this country for 300 years, the idea that you have to come together with other people, we are more powerful together. And when women thought that this could happen to other groups, but it couldn't happen to us, that was the problem. Because women saw it happening to other groups, and for some reason believed that it wouldn't happen to them. And I say this to other groups as well. Because when that ball of oppression starts rolling, it's not going to go skirt around its way and that way. It's going to pick up steam. It's going to get bigger and badder and roll over whomever it can and whatever group stand in its way. And that's why I say we're better together, stronger and more powerful. Let's learn from the history of what's happening to other groups and what's happened to them and figure out the game plan for going forward constitutionally, legislatively, and in the streets to protest.
And if I could just say, sorry, before we go on to the next thing, just thinking about the history, I know Dobbs was really shocking for all of us, but I also want to just hold space that the world of Roe v. Wade still was not a perfect world. There were still people who were lacking access to contraceptives. There were still people who were lacking access to the clinics that they needed for their health care. And we see this now even outside of reproductive justice. The Black mortality rate for Black maternal health is just so shocking. My wife delivered our first child a couple of months ago, and that entire time I thought, am I going to lose her during this? And this is something that, and you're talking now about, how we have to think of these conversations as being women, as being people of color, as being Americans. It's like the intersectionality. And I know several years ago we called this a rainbow coalition, and that's where we have to go right now. So I just want to be mindful of the impact of Dobbs and how what was before still was not enough.
I wanted to add a little to that, because if we only focus on our political wins, which are terrific, I mean, I don't want to denigrate the fact that we've won some significant political fights in the last couple of years. The reality is almost half of the states in this country are banning abortion. Mm-hmm. Okay, so not only all people in those states, all families are unable to not just make decisions to terminate a pregnancy, but to have a baby and to do so with healthy conditions. And what it also means is the state legislatures that ban abortion are also doing all kinds of really awful things. Mm-hmm. They're gerrymandering legislative districts, they're undermining democracy, they're interfering with voting rights. It's all interconnected. And it can't be thought of as a simple one solution on one issue. One of the things I've been really pushing is for us to really think not just politically, but to think long term. Mm-hmm. Because we're in this fight for our lifetimes. And probably our children's lifetimes, because we have to flip states that haven't seen people who respect civil liberties for a long time. I've been pushing a constitutional amendment that would actually affect all of the rights, not just that were taken away in Dobbs, but are likely to be undermined by the Supreme Court. And I think we need that 50-year plan to think about what that would look like, to think about how we craft it. For those of you I understand you guys all voted and said you were abolishing the Constitution. I wouldn't go that far. but I do think it's important for us to amend the Constitution, to bring it up to date, to ensure that all of the liberties that we hold dear are included, and that the health of all people are recognized, protected, and respected.
When we think about the reality, and I'm staying with this topic here of access, not merely to the access to terminate a pregnancy, but the access to provide adequate care from decision to become pregnant or not, all through. When you look at a state like Mississippi that has definitively no access, there are not enough providers. A person who gets pregnant and even wants to keep the baby but has high risk factors, if she's got the means, will leave the state to go elsewhere to seek care. This is not Jamila postulating. This is Jamila, the reporter, who's researched and actually done the work. Women are leaving when they can. the women who stay don't have the option. You look at states like Oklahoma, same thing. You look at parts of Pennsylvania, you look at parts of Ohio, where you definitively have no providers who can deal with a high-risk pregnancy, who can deal with, even a woman who wishes to keep a child she's gestating. Is this by design through the laws? Is this by design through the way, the enforcement of, well, you may have the procedure after this waiting period or that hoop?
Well, that's certainly, we always thought, when I worked specifically in women's health care, we definitely thought that waiting periods were an intentional delay to make it more difficult for women to access abortion. And well, it sounds like it's 24 hours, 48 hours, what's the big deal? Well, again, if you have to travel 4 hours or if you have to stay overnight, you have to see who's going to take care of your kids. How do you explain that to your workplace? I mean, none of this is easy for a lot of women. I mean, I'm old enough to remember stories about women flying to Puerto Rico or flying over, someplace else to, well, who can afford that? But the people really seek out the care that they can, but it's not always easy for everyone. But I think it's very intentional. And I think it's also, it affects all of women's health care. I mean, because a lot of women who have access to family planning, and but then it creates a fear for, my daughter-in-law's an OBGYN. I mean, she talks about the fact that women come in and ask her questions about, can I even be asking you this question? Maybe I should have my tubes tied now because I don't know that I would want to have a child. I mean, these are young women who are saying, I don't have the means to do this, I would be in trouble. That's pretty scary stuff. So I think there is what happens to in vitro, is that going to be allowed or not? I mean, there's so many issues. What about when something happens to a wanted pregnancy late in the pregnancy? That's a huge issue. There are a lot of physicians now, OBGYNs, are looking at what is allowed. Do they have to ask their ethics committee whether I can move ahead? And we've heard stories about women having to wait weeks in addition to get all those approvals if they ever get them in state. So it is, and the fact that it is so state by state at this point is really not helpful. Let me put it in the mildest terms. It's really not. This is where I was a state senator. I think the states are places that can do really important work. They're places you can do really innovative work. You can take care of gaps. We have to do that very much now. But without, national guarantee, a federal guarantee that I'm going to be safe no matter where I live, that affects our economy. It affects where you take jobs. It affects where you want to raise your kids. I mean, these have huge consequences for us in all sorts of ways. And as far as more broadly in healthcare, again, there are end-of-life decisions. I mean, there are all these decisions that you have to make for yourself or in your family that are private, that are personal, that are hard. And to think that the government's not going to allow us to make some of those decisions is pretty scary stuff. So I think it is, and I think as we talked about, this isn't just about women's rights. We recognize that you ask, what do I care about rights? We all put out a laundry list, clean water and clean air and, a planet that survives. I mean, walkable communities. I mean, you can make these sound even smaller, but they're not. And there's work to be done, and I think we have to take it a piece by piece. He talked about this. What can we do now? How can we survive this? How can we survive in a way that's healthy for ourselves and our families and for women and children? Is why we think long term as to how do we elect people who will respect, as we define it, freedom and liberty and justice on every issue, that really will be thoughtful about it and think about those consequences. Because I think many of these members or these votes in these different states, they really didn't think about all these consequences. They say, well, I didn't mean that. Well, tell that to the person who's affected by it. Mm-hmm. Or I meant it, I didn't really understand what the impact was. That's really not justifiable anymore, because we do know how broadly and deeply this goes. So there's work to be done. There are new elections. They happen all the time. We need to bring out people. We see more women running for office. We see more women winning. We see women who are, pro-life, so be careful about that. You can't always figure out that just because it's a woman that she's going to be on our side. We just had a Supreme Court race about that here in Pennsylvania. So it's, we really have to ask these questions. And I think that's the other thing is town halls, writing to your member of Congress. There are some people who may change their minds now that they understand the consequences. So when I said you have to get rid of all of them, I'm not sure you do if you actually can just get them to really understand the consequences for the constituents. As you pointed out, a lot of people from rural areas, I remember in the state Senate, looked out for the guards in those prisons. They were very attentive to the guards in those prisons. It was a livelihood for a lot of those people in those communities. Did they ask the same questions about the prisoners? I went to visit the women's prison at Muncie saying, they mostly were from Philadelphia. Like, how do their families get to visit them? How did their children get to visit them? They actually set up a children's room finally, which was great. To really sort of understand that they had to make that a safer place for their families to be. So there's work to be done there too, but I can't believe it's impossible. I have to believe that it's possible.
I want to focus just 2 minutes, or not even that long, on the hypocrisy of this. We're talking about people who are saying they're conservative when it comes to the government, and yet they are, yes, they've spent so much time, so many years talking about get the government out of our lives, all of this, less government, yes!
Did they forget?
Yes, and then they turn around and do these things to other people. So you know it's about control, it's about power, it's about how they want to remake the world. And they're afraid of the diversity, they're afraid of other people's voices, and they want to control the future of this country. And so this whole idea of using the government the way they're using it to undermine the rights of so many people, state, local, and federal government, is just pure hypocrisy. And it continues to be hypocrisy, and they need to be called out for that first and foremost. But the idea that behind that hypocrisy is this desire to reshape this country and to make it into their vision. And as you said, and this could be women too, Amy Coney Barrett on the U.S. Supreme Court, who comes from this very religious sect of Christianity that believes that women should only follow men and men should be in leadership positions. And they knew this. They knew this when they vetted her and brought her onto the court. So Chief Justice John Roberts began as a voting rights attorney. He created the formula that would, in 2013, gut the Voting Rights Act. He knew this. So it's a whole scheme. But then I go back to give them their props. They think generationally. We think to the next election. Right. That's why I said there has to be a plan, there has to be a strategy, and it has to be a coming together, litigation, legislation, protests, the trifecta for social change with vision. And that's how we've gotten this far, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and be predictive that there's going to be a back. As we said before, it's always going to be a backlash to whatever progress that's being made for whomever, But I just think the idea of what government is doing now, and that Justice Alito would actually write, yes, you never had this federal right, but go to your state legislatures. And so the state legislatures can change the law, so you can't go to the state legislatures. So it's just this round-robin trick that they want to think we're dumb enough to follow. But I do think all of us are smart enough, and the more we talk about the Constitution, the more we make it more accessible. They actually have monthly meetings, conservatives do, monthly meetings, either in person or online, on the Constitution. What I like is that we've come together. I'm about making the Constitution more accessible. So I really think this is really great for us to have these types of discussions. I think that's
We will get questions from the audience shortly. So be thinking about what you might want to ask the panel in a few more moments. Before we go to the audience, though, I want to talk about a confluence of these issues. We're on about the 14th Amendment. I want to stay here for a moment. In the state of Indiana, back when Mike Pence, that guy, was still... now he's candidate, of course, former vice president. But, back when he was governor.
He suspended his campaign.
Oh,
you were probably
I didn't know. Thank you for correcting me on
so
that.
The fly on his head told him to do it.
Oh, yeah. I'm speaking. That needs to be a shirt I wear. Thank you for correcting me. I had no idea. I'm wrong. I'm sorry. But
he whispered it. He didn't actually make a really big announcement.
back when he was governor of Indiana, I'll give the highlights of the case, the WHYY case. A woman who was pregnant found out that her lover was not going to leave his wife, and she was pregnant with his child far along, 8-ish months or something. She ingested a poison to try and commit suicide. She called a friend and said, I actually don't want to die, help me, got to the hospital. They were able to save the woman. The child did not survive. The child was born alive and perished. WHYY, the woman I'm bringing up here, wound up doing more than 1.5 years in jail for feticide. That case was called, oh, well, that's an anomaly. Well, that's not going to happen. Well, that wasn't supposed to. Well, she, and all of this. Now, the reality is that as states are making these laws, as states are limiting access to care, this is an example of someone who brings up a lot of issues. We've got the mental health thing. We've got the laws about what a woman can do to her own body while she is in a pregnant state. We've got the issue of a woman going to jail for the death of her child when she was trying to commit suicide, which is a whole other thing. Talk to me about how the Constitution should have protected WHYY, and talk to me about how, moving forward, we don't have that situation again, and how, in this climate, women who choose to ride bikes or do dangerous sports or whatnot can be protected no matter what condition of pregnancy or not pregnancy they're in by this grand document, our Constitution.
Well, that's a hard one. That's a hard one. Okay, yeah, okay.
I think Anjelica, with her background in criminal justice, needs to take this one.
Well, I think we all can agree that traditionally people try to harness the criminal legal system to deal with issues that, in my opinion, they feel not enough well-equipped to deal with the more appropriate means. So we're talking about the war on drugs, how we have now criminalized a lot of things in which we could use the healthcare system for. Even, the Second Amendment, how we have a string of laws for that wasn't traditionally in place before. And even in cases like this. So even for abortions, they have been criminalized in some states. Even going to another state to get an abortion, other states have criminalized that. And so I think, even though the story, I think the key here is that should we be using the criminal legal system in a way that contributes to mass incarceration, when there could be other things helpful, more appropriate, and like the example that you just raised?
Yeah, I would add to that it is, in my view, just horrendous that legislators believe that we ought to criminalize people for providing or obtaining health care in whatever form. Mm-hmm. It just makes no sense if we care about people's lives and health. Mm-hmm. And the people who are most affected are the people who are discriminated against the most in the system. So it's poor women, it's young women, it's black and brown women who are seeing criminalization affect their lives in much greater numbers than everybody else. But to me, I think the real harm is that we have criminalized the provision of health care. And that just makes no sense. And we have to fight against it. But, every state has criminal laws right now that impose regulations on health care delivery, and doctors and patients can be held liable in a variety of forms. And that's a problem. So we need to kind of revisit this question now that we see the I think Dobbs has opened this up to public scrutiny in a much greater way, but it's been here for 50 years, and we need to revisit many of those laws that are on the books.
And one thing that is happening now, I know certainly in Washington, is that almost, I'm not saying every bill, but I know there were so many examples of the appropriations bill. You know that on Friday we don't have they don't have some resolution to funding the government. There'll be government shutdown. So they keep putting up bills, but in those bills they keep finding a way to talk about abortion and to find more limitations for abortion, whether it's defense appropriations, that's making sure that women in the military can't get access to abortion. They want to make it even harder for them to do that, but it's sort of astounding almost in so many places where they actually find a way to fit that in as well. And so it's not only affecting even healthcare and women's rights, and it's also affecting our ability to function as a government. It's gotten that bad. So it's almost any bill can have additional provisions that are reduce our liberty and justice and access to services that we need. Certainly for women's health, and it obviously happens in others. But it's really happening today in almost every week, every day, for members of Congress to have to deal with this. So even when they reach agreement on the substance of the bill, they throw something in, call it a poison pill. But they put in something that makes it untenable for those of us who, well, I'm not there anymore, but those of them who are pro-choice and don't want to see these limitations. So it's making our whole government much more dysfunctional because of some of these issues.
And we also have to think about the prosecutors. And prosecutors are people too, but at the same time, prosecutors have a great deal of discretion. And so she could have not have been prosecuted.
Right.
Because it could have been decided not to prosecute her because of the mental health issue she was suffering under at the time. So the discretion we have with prosecutors goes back to what's going on in our criminal justice system, where everything now is, just because it's a criminal law doesn't mean that it has to be prosecuted. And so that discretion is, lends itself to abuse. And so we can see it being abused when it comes to, as was pointed out, the poverty of a particular defendant, the race, the education level, so many different ways in which the criminal justice system can be used and abused by the abuse of the prosecution of particular individuals. And then I think it's also, when it comes to women and babies, women and children, women in certain situations are overly prosecuted because it's seen as unfeminine or unmotherly. And this is historically that women have been treated differently for the same crimes that men have committed. And because this ideal of some people of what a woman is supposed to do, not supposed to do, this, once again, morally, we have certain people have put women on a particular pedestal and then are very eager to push them off when we fail to live up to that ideal of what a woman is supposed to do or a mother is supposed to do. And when especially in this day, and I'm going to go back because I'm old enough to have remembered when there were just having a baby, there were a lot of family members who were there to assist in that process. We don't have it anymore. And so many of us have moved around. You were probably the auntie or the friend or somebody who helped a young mother. So you have so many people who are women who are overwhelmed by the world, and still we have the same responsibilities, the same burdens, everything that we had before, without the assistance, without the lines of family help. In the play, when she talked about the relationships that she had with her aunts and grandmother and great-grandmother, we're so spread around now, we don't always have those same relationships. And so I think that it's easier in a lot of ways for women to be judged harshly when we're navigating the world with fewer resources, making 60 cents on a male's dollar and trying to balance everything out.
And that makes me think a lot about the child welfare state. If we're talking about forced births here, I'm thinking as a former PD, people who are being charged with endangering the welfare of a child if they can't afford a car seat, endangering the welfare of a child if someone comes by and somehow the utilities aren't working at that moment and have their parental rights just taken away. Just recently, in Pennsylvania, it was legal for someone to make an anonymous phone call and have the Child Welfare Authority show up at someone's house and search their property with no probable cause, no nothing. And people were having their children taken away from them with no type of due process or probable cause finding. And thankfully, with the Community Legal Services, ACLU of Pennsylvania, that doesn't happen. Like, there are protections now, and that just, we have to fight for those things, unfortunately.
And I want to give a shout out as a former community legal service attorney. So when I used to live in Philadelphia, so yeah, shout out for community legal services. But it's true. There's just such a double standard when it comes to women. What women do and what they're supposed to do in this society is just under a microscope so many times, and the criminal justice system plays a role in that.
Indeed. So I see folks are starting to wave hands with questions. So I'll leave it to Jonathan there, I think, with the microphone. So lovely.
Hi. Opinion. Is this one country, or are we 50-plus different realms?
We're supposed to be think about this room. Think about the backgrounds, economics, religions, all of these things that are here in this one room. Believe it or not, the one thing that's supposed to bind all of us, based on the framers' thinking, is the Constitution. See, and for many of you are like, oh, I didn't know that. It's like, yes, that's what they had in mind. We were supposed to be this diverse group bound by the Constitution. And yet, most people don't read it. They don't really know what's in it. And they don't even know they're being bound by it. Some people think we're just here to make money. That's what the United States is for. So going back to your question, we could be 50 different little countries, but we're supposed to be 50 different little countries or millions of people bound by this document called the Constitution. And I think that's what the fraying is around the edges, because we don't know what this document is. And right now we have a U.S. Supreme Court that's interpreting the document based on their religious or political ideologies, and it's undermining our confidence in the court and therefore our confidence in this country. Because the one thing we thought we had was at least the Supreme Court. Right. Even if we didn't agree with their opinions, we thought that at least they had some modicum of a moral compass. And right now, you know, that belief has been shattered.
And if I could just hop on in that too, is thinking of the, you know, one country, but also the migrants who are moving through and who are here as well. And a lot of folks are not given the same type of protections that we know that they are entitled to, but there are plenty of people who are being held and detained without cause, without representation, and also deported as well. And so when we're thinking about this, you know, living document, is making sure we're also thinking about the rights of migrants too.
I was just going to say this, having been a state senator and then a congresswoman, particularly as a state senate, but both ways. It's a balance here. I mean, I think the Constitution says states have some rights, so you leave certain things to the state, but the federal government can either mandate something or can also use a lot of sort of compelling states to do things by saying, well, we're going to take away all your transportation money if you don't do motor voter. Okay, so that was like a small thing, but not a small thing. And a bunch of other things that we would actually say, here's what you have to do. And the reason we can compel you to is because we give you money to do this thing that's related. So but it is a balance, because states do want to have, even this being state and local, there are issues about what local responsibility there is and what state is. And I think access to education is a perfect example of that balance. The states are supposed to make up for the inequity in funding, because we use property taxes primarily to fund education. Well, that makes a very inequitable system in education, so the state's supposed to make up for it. Of course, we've gone through a few court cases saying that Pennsylvania hasn't done a very good job of that. And, of course, the federal government throws in some money for poor children and, disabled. So it's a mixed bag. I mean, but I think we have to think of ourselves, and I think the Constitution backs up here, as one country with variety within the states. But to actually think that you have some basic rights denied when you cross a state line, I think is pretty strong stuff. That I think gets us a little bit over the edge here.
Right. So I wanted to, again, I think you're absolutely right that it was the founders originally thought, or the framers believed, that the Constitution was the document that would hold us together. And to me, the beauty of the Constitution really isn't the individual rights we've been talking about so much as the system of checks and balances that keeps power among the differing branches somewhat equal. To me, the biggest problem today is that equality is gone. That the checks and balances that we have lived under for since the founding of our nation are totally gone. They're skewed. They don't work. And we need to come back to say, if we are going to be one country, there has to be a balance of power among differing branches of government. There has to be respect for the minority viewpoint, which is what our notion of individual rights does. And there has to be respect for our ability to make decisions about what's right in our society. That is, the ability to have a democracy. And too much today, in my view, is that democracy is threatened. We don't have the balance of power, but we also have autocrats who really want to take that sense of democracy away from all of us. And the only antidote to a loss of democracy is to fight for it. And so, to me, all of us need to get active to make a difference in the world. I don't care what you do, but you have to do something. And whatever it is to make a difference is really important.
My question, actually, it sort of comes off of that. Assuming we're not going to abolish the Constitution, which apparently many people voted for when they saw the play, the idea of amending it seems like a rational, normal thing, but that's really hard, too. So, and Ms. Kolbert, you said we should amend the Constitution, but can we actually do that in this environment? That it seems really hard.
Well, actually, the Constitution's been amended, 27 times? A number of amendments in the last century. So, yes. Can we do it? Yes. Does it take a lot of hard work? Yes. Does it take winning political power? Yes. Does it take a long-term plan? Are we going to do it tomorrow? No. We can't even get a statute passed in Pennsylvania until we flip the Senate. We can't even get a statute nationwide passed until we control Congress and the presidency. So all of those things have to happen, but you're right, it can't happen in a vacuum, and it's got to happen with a long-term vision of what we need to do. And all of the things we've been talking about actually work toward gaining the political power that would be necessary to change the Constitution.
I have a feeling that this audience, since you're sitting here listening, spending an hour plus with us talking about the Constitution, you'll be the activists. And you just have to grow. We have to grow that, how many people can get involved and should. Feels good, actually, so to get involved.
Let's see.
Coming over here.
Well, the Equal Rights Amendment. I mean, that's a. Can we?
It's still hanging out there. We just have like a little. We just have to. We're almost there.
I think it's next year.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Next year we're going to do it.
I just want to say almost there.
See, I disagree. I don't think the Equal Rights Amendment
there.
will ever be law because the original time period was pretty clear and specified, and I just don't see this court sitting around and letting it become law when they don't agree with it. And so I love the Equal Rights Amendment. It's a great thing to build upon, but we need one that's more specific to both protect the reproductive rights that we've lost and a whole range of other rights that are likely to go as well. And while the ERA is a good starting point, it cannot be where we end up in the long term.
It'd be good to get it done, I think, if we could, and then see what else we can do. Sorry.
He gave me the mic, but then you guys start talking.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I don't know if is it on? Okay.
Yep.
I have a very straightforward question, but it's not an easy question, particularly for the three legal scholars. Do you believe in expansion of the court could happen or should happen?
I've been asked this question, and I've done like legal commentary on different like stations, CNN and such, about it. Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to expand the court because the court in place at the time during the New Deal would not support and rendered unconstitutional some of the laws that were passed that he wanted. Expanding the court now also means that keeping the expansion there for other administrations. So if you expand it, we're just going to end up in the same situation because there's going to be another administration that comes in and uses the court in a way that the previous administration or we don't like, and we then have an expanded court with the same situation. So I don't believe the court should be expanded. I don't think it's going to be constitutionally viable to expand it, and I don't think it's going to be helpful in the end.
I agree. I don't think expansion of the court is the answer. The one proposal that I'm really intrigued by and I really like is term limiting the court.
Term limits.
There's the Brennan Center has been pushing this proposal that says that all justices are limited to 18-year terms. Every president in their 4-year term of office gets to appoint one person, and the 18-year term limits work in that way, and that to me makes a lot of sense. I don't think changing the numbers really helps us because it's who's ever in power gets more people to nominate.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
I also think, personally, the conversation on expansion, I think it's just so out there when right now is the whole issue is like ethics, like, even having a rule book on the judicial ethics. When do you have a conflict of interest? And that if that is open to interpretation, then we're in trouble.
I think it's necessary to begin to look at impeachment seriously for a U.S. Supreme Court justice. And it's just crucial at this point because the sense of power hungriness and disregard for rules, ethics, impropriety is to the point that without making the motions toward impeachment, I don't think these justices are going to, since they sit for life, are going to rule themselves or roll stop their own abuse of power. I think it's going to have to be outside forces that at least begin the process for it to be taken seriously by them and those billionaires who are supporting them.
Good evening. My name is Duke Duclos, and first of all, I'm surprised that I'm sitting here before all of you with a mic because I'm very shy. Being a foreigner myself, I've seen so many different documents. However, I believe that the Constitution itself is one of the greatest documents in the world. And it's time that we simply think about reconstitution. Instead of just Constitution, just rebuild it in a sense, not destroying it, but rebuild it. Reconstitution, I believe. That's what it should be.
Is that the same as having an amendment?
In a sense, but reconstitution instead of just the Constitution. I think that's a good way to start with it. You cannot destroy it. I think it's pliable in a sense if we really think in a sense of humanity, the way that we see the world, the way we see one another. We should view one another in a sense to what's best for each and every one of us, not just one person. You don't have to be either a lawyer, a doctor, or a scholar to get what's best out of this country. I think anyone, we have something in common, and that's just the air we breathe. And we should just enjoy that and care for one another. And just like healthcare, if you don't care, the key word in healthcare is care, not just health.
You are very fortunate because you have the last question, but I'm not hearing the question.
It wasn't a question, it was a suggestion.
Yeah, okay. So you know what? Thank you. And rising to the ideals of the founders in this grand democracy is a great thing. But I want to give one last question, that a statement of interrogation. It ends with a question mark. Usually starts with who, what, when, where, why, how.
Well, one of the things that bothers me the most and that scares me the most is not necessarily the taking away of rights, but taking away the power of the state legislatures or the federal government to remedy situations. So, for example, we can't have gun control because gun control is unconstitutional, or we can't have health care that requires insurance coverage for reproductive rights because that's the Hobby Lobby case. Or we can't regulate corporate contributions that essentially control the political process because of Citizens United. And these are all things that the federal government has tried, or the state governments have tried to do to remedy problems that the Supreme Court has said you don't have the power to do that, which makes it very difficult to remedy these problems. How do we fix that? What can we do about that?
We win elections. I mean, that is really the only answer. I mean, I wish that wasn't the case, but the reality is the impediments that are keeping us away from making change that's positive are controlled by political bodies.
And again, to just remind people that who appoints these justices and who, that is people we elect to be president. And those people often have been elected to something else before that. So I think all of us have talked about this because we're not voting for the Supreme Court justices. We have to start really at the school board level. Again, they're taking action themselves because they're emboldened by the Supreme Court's decision. So I think that's even some things that the Supreme Court hasn't yet ruled on. They're still emboldened, as they were by the previous president, to really say we can take these steps and we can get them done. Taking books out of libraries and that kind of thing. I mean, who imagined that was going to happen again? But it's happening right now in our own backyards. So it is about school boards. It is about local state reps. It is about our city council. It is about, of course, who's at the state level and, of course, who's on the federal level, because that's ultimately the people who might end up being president. And we have to keep an eye on that from the get-go. So it's not just about the president; it's about all of it, all of the levels. It seems more doable in a way too. It's not just okay. You vote once every 4 years, and that you either win or you lose. But there are a whole lot of other elections that we have been winning in Pennsylvania. We should be proud of that, and that we could keep doing that in the state and on local elections as well. So, and good and exciting and more diversity in our legislatures than ever before, more women, more minorities. That's all very, very exciting. People coming from very different backgrounds. That's great stuff. I think...
Does it all make you... Because the thing is, I need a happy ending.
I don't disagree.
See, the thing is, I lived through Nixon. The thing is, he had people in his own party said, right. Dude, you got to resign. We're not seeing that now.
No.
And I'm actually hearing certain candidates say, Rick Santorum, Pennsylvania, am I correct? Maybe we should not have democracy. He said that recently. So my question is, can you give, I hope and action, win the elections, but can you leave us on a hopeful note, please?
You know what? Here's what I'm going to say and I'm sure my colleagues will say, the fact that we are all here, I always do this. Sometimes I just look around and say, look at where we are and the obstacles we had to overcome based on religion and race and gender and sexual orientation and everything else. And we are here in this room together. That didn't fall out of the sky. People worked to make that happen. Generations before did not know but believed that we could exist in this way. And I think the hope is that we have to push for generations unborn to have a level of freedom that we don't have right now. That means the vision. Without vision, the people perish. What is the vision of freedom that we want to have for generations unborn? Generations 2, 3 generations from now. That's what our ancestors did in order for us to be here. The selfishness that I see is that we want it all to happen right now in front of us. And that's not how we got here. We got here because our ancestors invested in a future they knew they would never see. Can we do that? And when we do, take that on, invest in it, and say, I'm going to be a part of that future, that's the hope and the dream of the slave, of our ancestors, of the immigrants, of all the people who came together and overcame every bloody obstacle that they faced in order for us to be in this room right now. If we can do that, then we have an America in the future that's worthy of everything we invest in it, and that's the hope we need to think about.
I want to thank this incredible panel. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking part. And period, full stop. WHYY, the Arden Theater, tell your stories. Make people understand that what happens today has happened somewhere else. There are ways that we connect. There are ways that we recognize that hearing the story of some little speech and debate girl can touch the hearts of we with Grinch hearts that usually don't grow. We feel connected, and we come and we do these kinds of things. Make friends with a journalist, please. We will tell your stories. Not always. Sometimes they're not stories. Sometimes you want us to do press release. Tell your stories. The news of today is the history that our grandkids are going to read one day, that our children are going to read one day, that we'll read and go, oh yeah, I remember that happened. So, we are more alike than we are dissimilar, and that is the beauty of this great democracy. And keep on joining together and coming to events like this, because I love moderating smart panels, and I hope you have me back to do that. Thank you.